If you're ready to hear one of the most shocking tales from the Wild West, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up, because this story will change everything you thought you knew about honor in the frontier. The dust was still settling from the cattle drive when I first laid eyes on her. September 1882, in the godforsaken town of Bitter Creek, Wyoming Territory. I'd been riding for 3 weeks straight, my horse's hooves worn thin and my water running low, when I spotted the ramshackle saloon that would change the course of 3 lives forever. My name is Sam McKenzie, and I'd been running from my past for the better part of 2 years. The badge I once wore as a U.S. Marshal meant nothing, no not, after what happened in Dodge City. Some men can carry the weight of their mistakes like a familiar coat. Others, like me, find that weight crushing enough to drive them into the wilderness, searching for something they can never quite name, chasing redemption across endless miles of unforgiving prairie. The Golden Dollar Saloon stood crooked against the prairie wind, its weathered boards telling stories of countless storms and broken dreams. Piano music drifted through the batwing doors, competing with the sound of drunken laughter, the occasional crash of breaking glass, and the low murmur of men making deals they'd regret come morning. It was the kind of place where decent folks crossed the street to avoid, but I'd stopped being decent folk a long time ago. I tied my horse to the hitching post and pushed through those doors, my spurs jangling against the warped floorboards like a death knell. The smell hit me: first stale whiskey, tobacco smoke, unwashed bodies, and something else I couldn't quite place. Something that made my stomach turn and my hand instinctively move toward the Colt .45 on my hip. The bartender, a man with arms like tree trunks and scars that spoke of a violent past, looked up from the glass he was wiping with a dirty rag. "What'll it be, stranger?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 similar conversations with men who'd lost their way. "Whiskey," I replied, dropping a silver dollar on the bar with more force than necessary. "The good stuff, if you've got it." He poured me a measure of amber liquid that looked like it might actually be whiskey, though I'd learned not to make assumptions in places like this. The frontier had a way of disappointing a man's expectations, especially when it came to the quality of liquor and the character of men. As I lifted the glass to my lips, I heard it a sound that made my blood run cold and my hand freeze halfway to my mouth. A woman's voice, pleading, coming from the back room like a cry for help from the depths of hell itself. "Please, Charlie, don't do this. There has to be another way. We're family, for God's sake." The bartender's hand paused mid-wipe, and several of the other patrons suddenly found their drinks very interesting, their eyes focused anywhere but on my face. I set my glass down without taking a sip, my hand instinctively moving to the worn grip of my pistol. Old habits die hard, and the habit of protecting the innocent was one I'd never quite shaken, no matter how far I'd fallen from grace. "Mind your own business, Marshal," the bartender said, though I hadn't told him my former occupation. Word travels fast in small towns, and apparently my reputation had preceded me like a shadow I couldn't outrun. The voices from the back room grew louder, more desperate, and I could make out a man's voice now, slurred with drink and desperation. "She's all I got left to trade, Briggs. You know she's worth more than a bottle of your best whiskey. Hell, she's worth more than this whole damn saloon and every broken-down horse in the stable. Charlie, please." The woman's voice came again, and this time I could hear the tears in it, the kind of heartbreak that cuts deeper than any knife. "I'm your sister. How can you do this to me? How can you trade away the only family you have left?" My jaw tightened until I thought my teeth might crack. I'd seen plenty of low-down behavior in my years wearing the badge, had witnessed the depths to which desperate men would sink, but a man trading his own sister was something that made my trigger finger itch and my conscience scream. The bartender Briggs apparently caught my expression and shook his head slowly. Like I said, stranger, mind your own business. Charlie Dalton's got debts to pay, and his sister's the only currency he's got left in this world. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor like fingernails on a coffin lid. The saloon had gone quiet, except for the tinny piano in the corner, where a woman in a faded red dress continued playing as if nothing was happening, as if the world wasn't about to turn upside down. "How much?" I asked, my voice cutting through the silence. Briggs raised an eyebrow, studying me like I was some kind of curiosity. How much what? How much is he asking for her? The big man's laugh was like gravel in a coffee grinder, harsh and grating. "You looking to buy yourself a woman, Marshal? Didn't think you were the type, what with your reputation for righteousness and all." Before I could answer, the backroom door burst open like a gunshot, and Charlie Dalton stumbled out, dragging a young woman behind him. She was maybe with auburn hair that caught the lamplight like burnished copper and green, eyes that blazed with a mixture of fear and fury that would have intimidated lesser men. Her dress was simple but clean, mended in places but cared for, and despite the circumstances, she carried herself with a dignity that spoke of better times, of a life that had once held promise. Charlie himself was a different story entirely. Thin as a rail, with hollow cheeks and the shaky hands of a man who'd been drinking too much for too long, fighting demons that whiskey couldn't quite drown. His clothes hung on him like they'd been made for someone twice his size, and his eyes held that desperate look I'd seen in too many men who'd lost everything to cards, drink, or both, the look of a man who'd sold his soul and was surprised to find it had been worth so little. "Here she is, Briggs," Charlie said, his voice cracking like a boy's. "My sister Emma, prettiest girl in 3 counties, and she can cook, clean, and read better than most men. She's worth 10 bottles of your best whiskey, easy. Hell, she's worth 20. Emma yanked her arm free from his grip with surprising strength, her eyes flashing like green fire. "Charlie, you're drunk. You don't know what you're saying. This isn't you talking, it's the whiskey and whatever poison these men have been pouring in your ears." "I know exactly what I'm saying," he replied, though his words slurred together like a man speaking through molasses. "I need that whiskey. Emma, I need it more than anything else in this godforsaken world. I'd seen enough, more than enough." I walked over to where they stood, my boots echoing in the suddenly silent saloon like the steady beat of a funeral drum. Charlie looked up at me with bloodshot eyes that held no recognition of the magnitude of what he was doing, while Emma took a step back, her hand moving to her throat in a gesture that was both defensive and dignified. "Name's Sam McKenzie," I said to Charlie, extending my hand like we were meeting under normal circumstances. "I understand you're looking to make a trade." Charlie's face lit up like Christmas morning, like he'd just discovered gold in his backyard. "You interested in Emma? She's a good girl. I swear it on our mother's grave. Never been married, keeps a clean house, and she's got more sense than most men I know. She can read and write, to our pa saw to that before he died." "Charlie, stop," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying more authority than a judge's gavel. "Please, just stop." I ignored her for the moment, keeping my eyes on her brother, trying to read the man beneath the desperation and drink. What kind of debts are we talking about here? Gambling debts, Briggs interjected, wiping his hands on his apron like he was washing blood from them. Charlie here owes money to some very dangerous men, the kind who don't take kindly to being kept waiting. They'll be coming for him soon, and they won't be interested in whiskey as payment for what he owes. I nodded slowly, understanding the situation better now. Charlie wasn't just a drunk, he was a desperate man trying to save his own skin, willing to sacrifice his sister to buy himself a few more days of life. Still didn't make what he was doing right, but it explained the urgency, the panic in his eyes. How much time does he have? I asked. They'll be here tomorrow, Charlie said, his voice barely audible above the piano music. Maybe the day after. I don't know exactly when, but I know I need to be gone before they get here, need to be somewhere they can't find me. I looked at Emma then, really looked at her. She was beautiful, no doubt about that. But there was something else, there a strength that reminded me of the women I'd known growing up in Missouri. Women who'd survived Indian raids, drought, locust swarms, and the kind of hardship that would break most city folk like dry kindling. Women who'd learned to be strong because the alternative was death. What do you want? I asked her directly, man to woman, equal to equal. She met my eyes without flinching, without the cowering I'd expected. I want my brother to remember that we're family, that we're supposed to take care of each other, not sell each other to the highest bidder like cattle at market. But if he goes through with this, I pressed, needing to know where she stood. Chin lifted slightly, defiant. Then I want to know that the man who's buying me isn't going to treat me like livestock, that he remembers I'm a human being with thoughts and feelings and dreams that matter. The honesty in her voice hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Here was a woman facing the worst situation imaginable, and she was still thinking about dignity and decency. It reminded me why I'd become a marshal in the first place, to protect people like her from people like the man I'd become. I'll make you a deal, I said to Charlie, pulling out my wallet. I'll pay your debts, all of them, and I'll give you enough money to get you to California or wherever you want to go. But I'm not buying your sister. I'm buying you time to remember what family means. Charlie's eyes widened like I'd just offered. Him, the moon, you'd do that? For strangers? For people you don't even know? I would, I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Maybe it was the memory of the man I used to be, or maybe it was the way Emma was looking at me like I might actually be one of the good guys. But there's a condition. Name it, Charlie said eagerly, like a drowning man grasping for driftwood. You. Give me your word that you'll never do anything like this again. That you'll get yourself cleaned up and be the kind of brother she deserves. The kind of man your parents raised you to be. Charlie looked at Emma, then back at me, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes that might have been shame. You got my word, Marshal. I swear it on our parents' graves. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a roll of bills, most of the money I had left in the world, my stake for starting over somewhere new. Briggs, what does he owe? $200, the bartender replied, plus interest that's been accumulating like snow in a blizzard. I counted out the money and handed it to Briggs, then gave Charlie another $100. That should get you started somewhere new, somewhere you can make a fresh beginning. Emma was staring at me like I'd grown. A second head. Why? She asked, her voice filled with wonder. Why would you do this for us? What do you get out of it? I looked at her for a long moment, trying to find the right words. Because somebody should, I said finally. Because family shouldn't be bought and sold like cattle. And because, I paused, surprised by my own honesty. Because I've done enough wrong in my life. Maybe it's time I did something right. The next morning found me sitting on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sun paint the prairie in shades of gold and amber. I'd paid for 2 rooms, one for Emma and one for Charlie, and spent the night staring at the ceiling, thinking about what I'd done. $250 was most of my savings. Money I'd been planning to use to start over somewhere new, somewhere my past couldn't follow me. Now I was nearly broke, tied to 2 strangers in a town I'd never planned to stay in. Emma appeared in the doorway, wearing a different dress, blue calico with tiny white flowers that reminded me of the prairie in springtime. She'd pinned her hair up, and in the morning light, she looked younger than she had the night before. More vulnerable, but also more determined, like a woman who'd made peace with whatever came next. "Mr. McKenzie," she said, sitting down in the chair beside me with the careful grace of a lady. "I need to talk to you." "Just Sam," I replied, watching. A tumbleweed rolled down the main street like a lost soul, and I figured you might. She was quiet for a moment, watching the same tumbleweed disappear round the corner. "What you did last night, ... I've never seen anything like it. A complete stranger spending his own money to help people he doesn't even know. It doesn't make sense." "It wasn't charity," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what it was. "Then, what was it?" I considered the question, rolling it around in my mind like a marble. Maybe it was selfishness. Maybe I needed to feel like I was worth something again, like I could still do some good in this world. She turned to look at me then, her green eyes serious as a judge's verdict. "What happened to you, Sam? What made you stop being a marshal?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been dreading it, but I'd known it was coming. "I made a mistake," I said, finally. "A big one. People died because of it." "What kind of mistake?" I stood up, needing to move, needing to put some distance between myself and the memories. The kind that gets innocent people killed. The kind that makes you realize you're not the man you thought you were. That all your good intentions don't mean a damn thing when push comes to shove. Emma was quiet for a long moment. "My husband died in a mining accident 2 years ago," she said suddenly. "Cave-in at the silver mine outside Denver. I blamed myself for months, thinking that if I'd convinced him to find different work, if I'd been a better wife, he'd still be alive." I looked at her, surprised by the revelation. "I'm sorry for your loss. Charlie brought me out here afterward, said we'd start fresh, maybe find some land to farm, build something together. But he started drinking more and more, and gambling, ... double quotes. She shrugged. "I guess we all have our ways of running from pain. Is that what you think I'm doing, running? I think you're a man who's forgotten that making one mistake doesn't erase all the good you've done. And I think you're kinder than you want to admit, more decent than you give yourself credit for." Before I could respond, Charlie stumbled out of the boarding house, looking like he'd been dragged behind a horse and left for dead. His face was pale as fresh snow, and his hands were shaking worse than they had the night before. The withdrawal was starting to set in. "Sam," he said, his voice barely audible, "I need to tell you something about those men I owe money to." My blood went cold, that familiar feeling of impending doom settling over me like a shroud. "What about them? They're not just gamblers. They're part of the Krensky gang. You know, the ones who've been robbing trains and banks all across the territory." I felt the world tilt slightly, like I was standing on the deck of a ship in rough seas. The Krensky gang was bad news. A group of outlaws led by a man named Victor Krensky, who'd been terrorizing the Wyoming Territory for the better part of a year. They were the kind of men who didn't just collect debts. They made examples of people, left bodies scattered across the prairie as warnings to others. "How much do you really owe them, Charlie?" His face crumpled like paper in a fire. "It's not just the gambling debts. They hired me to scout for them, to tell them about bank shipments and such. But I got scared and backed out after they killed that family in Cheyenne. They said I owed them for the jobs I didn't help with." Emma stood up so fast her chair toppled over. "Charlie, what are you saying?" "I'm saying the $200 won't be enough," he whispered. "They want $1,000, or they want me to finish the jobs I promised to do. And if I don't ... He looked at his sister with eyes full of shame. "They said they'd take payment in other ways." I felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. "When are they coming? Today? Maybe this afternoon? I don't know exactly, but soon." I looked at Emma, whose face had gone white as a sheet. "Pack your things," I told her. "Both of you, we're leaving." "Where are we going to go?" she asked. "I don't know yet. But we're not staying here to find out what the Krensky gang considers acceptable payment." We spent the next hour gathering what few possessions they had. Emma moved with efficient purpose, but I could see the fear in her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she folded her clothes. Charlie was nearly useless, shaking so badly he could barely pack his few belongings. As we prepared to leave, I found myself thinking about the irony of the situation. I'd tried to do one good deed to help a family in trouble, and now I was back to exactly where I'd started, running from dangerous men and trying to protect innocent people. Some things, it seemed, never changed. "Sam," Emma said, as we loaded the last of their things onto the pack horse I'd bought with the last of my money, "why are you doing this? You don't owe us anything. You could just ride away and never look back." I tightened the cinch on my saddle, considering her question, "because I've run away from enough things in my life. Maybe it's time I stood and fought for something worth fighting for." She smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen from her. "What are we fighting for?" "For the right to choose our own path. For the idea that family means something. For," I paused, surprised by my own words, "for the chance to be better than the worst thing we've ever done." As we rode out of Bitter Creek, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by the occasional mesa or stand of cottonwoods. It was beautiful country, but it was also dangerous, the kind of place where a man could disappear and never be found, where the only law was what a man carried in his holster. We rode hard for the first few hours, putting as much distance as possible between us and the town. Charlie was a poor rider, swaying in his saddle and occasionally slumping forward like he might fall. Emma rode with the easy grace of someone who'd grown up around horses, her back straight and her eyes constantly scanning the horizon for signs of trouble. "There's a town called Cedar Ridge about 30 miles north," I told them during a brief rest. "We can resupply there and figure out our next move." "What if they follow us?" Emma asked. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens," I replied. I was already thinking about the Krensky gang's reputation. They were known for their persistence as much as their brutality. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red like a prairie fire, I spotted something that made my heart sink. Dust clouds on the horizon, moving in our direction with purpose. Too much dust for a single rider, too organized to be cattle. "They're coming," I said quietly. Emma followed my gaze and went pale. "How many?" I squinted at the dust clouds, trying to judge the distance and size. 4, maybe 5 riders. Moving fast. Charlie made a sound that was half sob, half moan. "They're going to kill us all." "No," I said firmly. "They're not." But even as I said it, I wondered if I was making another mistake. The kind that got innocent people killed. The kind that had driven me away from the badge and into the wilderness in the first place. The dust clouds were getting closer. The abandoned homestead appeared like a mirage in the gathering dusker. Small log cabin with a collapsed roof and a corral that had seen better days. It wasn't much, but it was the only cover we'd seen for miles. The only thing standing between us and the endless expanse of prairie. "There," I pointed toward the structure. "We'll make our stand." Emma nodded grimly, understanding what I meant. Without explanation, but Charlie looked like he might be sick. "They'll kill us all," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not if I can help it," I replied, though I wasn't sure how much help I could be. The Krensky gang had a reputation for a reason, and I was just one man with a gun and a head, full of regrets. We reached the homestead just as the sun touched the horizon, painting the world in shades of blood and gold. I helped Emma down from her horse, then grabbed my rifle from the saddle boot. "Get inside," I told them. "Stay low and stay quiet." The cabin was in worse shape than it had looked from a distance. The roof had partially collapsed, leaving a gaping hole that let in the evening sky like an open wound. The walls were solid enough, though, and there were gaps between the logs that would serve as shooting positions if it came to that. "Sam," Emma said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I know how to shoot." I looked at her, surprised. "You do?" "My father taught me when I was 12. We had trouble with wolves on our ranch in Colorado. He said every member of the family needed to know how to protect themselves." I nodded and handed her my backup pistol, smaller .38, that had been my hideout gun during my Marshal days. "Stay with Charlie if they get past me, ... "They won't," she said, with a confidence I wished I felt. The sound of approaching horses grew louder, hoofbeats like thunder on the prairie. I positioned myself at the front wall, peering through a gap in the logs. 5 riders, just as I'd estimated. They were spread out in a rough line, moving cautiously now that they'd spotted the homestead. "McKenzie," the voice carried across the prairie, rough and accented. "Russian, maybe, or Eastern European. We know you're in there. Send out Charlie Dalton, and we'll let you and the woman ride away." I recognized the voice from wanted posters, Victor Krensky himself. The man had a price on his head in 4 territories, and here he was, calling me out like we were old friends meeting for drinks. "Charlie's not going anywhere." I called back, "And neither are we." Krensky's laugh echoed across the darkening prairie like the howl of a wolf. "You're brave, I'll give you that. But you're also stupid. We've got you surrounded, and we've got all night." He was right about being surrounded. From my position, I could see his men spreading out, taking positions behind rocks and in the shallow arroyos that crisscrossed the area. They were professionals, moving with the kind of coordination that spoke of experience and discipline. "What do you want with Charlie?" I called out, hoping to buy time while I counted their positions. "He owes us money, and he owes us work," Krensky replied. "But mostly, he owes us respect." Nobody walks away from the Krensky gang and lives to tell about it. I glanced back at Charlie, who was huddled in the corner like a whipped dog. Emma sat beside him, the pistol in her lap, her jaw set with determination that reminded me of her pioneer ancestors. "There's got to be another way," I called out. "Name your price." "The price is Charlie Dalton's life." Krensky shouted back. "And if you don't send him out, we'll take yours and the woman's too." The negotiations, such as they were, had ended. I checked my rifle Winchester .44 240 that had served me well over the years. 15 rounds in the magazine, plus the 6. In my Colt and the 5 in Emma's .38. Not much against 5 experienced gunmen, but it would have to do. The first shot came from the rocks to my left, splintering the log near my head and sending wood chips flying. I ducked down, then came up firing, my rifle barking in the growing darkness. I saw one of Krensky's men dive for cover, but I couldn't tell if I'd hit him. "Stay down," I yelled to Emma and Charlie as bullets began to pepper the cabin walls like hail. The fight settled into a rhythm, brief exchanges of gunfire, followed by periods of tense quiet. I moved from position to position, using the gaps in the logs to return fire whenever I saw a muzzle flash. The outlaws were good, but they were also cautious. They knew they had the advantage of numbers and time. "Sam," Emma's voice cut through. "The gunfire, Charlie's hurt." I glanced back and saw blood on Charlie's shirt. A bullet had found its way through one of the larger gaps in the logs, catching him in the shoulder. He was conscious but pale, his eyes wide with shock and pain. "How bad?" I asked. "It went through," Emma replied, pressing her petticoat against the wound. "But he's lost a lot of blood." Another volley of shots forced me back to the wall. One of Krensky's men was trying to work his way around to the side of the cabin, using the failing light as cover. I tracked his movement, waiting for the right moment, my fingers steady on the trigger. When he broke cover, I was ready. My rifle cracked, and the man spun around, his gun flying from his hand. He didn't get up. "Nice shot," Marshal Krensky called out. "But you're just delaying the inevitable." Maybe he was right. We had water for maybe a day, and my ammunition wouldn't last forever. But I'd been in worse situations before, and I'd survived. By being smarter than my enemies, not just tougher. "Emma," I said quietly, "can you see the corral from where you are?" She moved to the back wall and peered through a gap. "Yes, why? There's a well out there. If we can reach it after dark, we might be able to hold out longer. That's assuming they don't rush us before then." As if summoned by her words, I heard the sound of running feet. 2 of Krensky's men were charging the cabin, hoping to catch us off guard in the chaos. I brought my rifle up and fired, catching the first man center mass. He went down hard, his momentum carrying him forward into the dirt. The second man made it to the wall. The sound of splintering wood filled the air as he kicked at the door. I spun around, bringing my rifle to bear, but Emma was faster. The .38 barked twice in rapid succession, and the man fell backward, clutching his chest. "Nice shooting," I said, meaning it. She looked at the smoking gun in her hand, her face pale. "I never killed anyone before." "You did what you had to do," I replied, "to protect your brother and yourself." Outside, Krensky was shouting orders in what sounded like Russian. The attack had cost him 2 men, but he still had the advantage, and now he was angry. "Last chance, McKenzie," he called out. "Send out Charlie, or we burn you out." Through the gaps in the logs, I could see one of his men preparing a torch. They weren't bluffing, they were going to try to burn down the cabin with us inside. They're going to torch the place, I told Emma. We need to get out of here. Where can we go? She asked. I looked around the cabin, thinking fast. The back wall was partially collapsed, leaving a gap large enough for a person to squeeze through. If we could make it to the corral, we might be able to use the well as cover. The corral, I said. It's not much, but it's better than burning alive. Emma nodded and helped Charlie to his feet. He was weak from blood loss, but he could walk. I gathered what ammunition I could carry and moved to the back wall. When I give the signal, run for the corral, I told them. Don't stop for anything. The torch was getting closer. I could see the orange glow through the front wall, and I could smell smoke. Time was running out like sand through an hourglass. Now, I hissed. We squeezed through the gap in the back wall and ran for the corral. The darkness was our ally. Now Krensky's men couldn't see us clearly, and their shots went wide. We made it to the stone well just as the cabin burst into flames behind us. The light from the burning building illuminated the area around us, but it also revealed our position. Krensky's remaining men started moving in, confident that they had us trapped like rats in a barrel. It's over, McKenzie. Krensky called out, You've got nowhere left to run. I checked my ammunition, 6 rounds left in the rifle, 4 in my Colt, and 3 in Emma's .38. Not enough to fight our way out, but maybe enough to make them think twice about rushing us. What now? Emma asked. I looked at her, then at Charlie, who was barely conscious. We were trapped, outnumbered, and running out of options. But we were still alive, and sometimes that was enough. Now we find out what we're really made of, I said. The flames reached higher into the night sky, and I could hear Krensky's men moving closer through the darkness. The flames from the burning cabin cast dancing shadows across the prairie, turning the night into something from a fever dream. I crouched behind the stone well, my rifle ready, watching for movement in the flickering light. Emma knelt beside Charlie, who was drifting in and out of consciousness from blood loss, her hand steady, despite the terror that must have been coursing through her veins. Mackenzie Krensky's voice carried across the open ground. You've got spirit, I'll give you that. But this ends now. I could see 2 shapes moving in the darkness beyond the firelight, Krensky and his last remaining man. They were being cautious. Now, having lost 3 of their number to what they'd probably thought would be an easy job. The kind of men who prey on the weak don't expect their victims to bite back. Charlie, I said quietly, can you hear me? He lifted his head, his eyes focusing with effort. Yeah, I can hear you. I need you to tell me about the jobs Krensky wanted you to do. Everything you remember. Emma looked at me strangely. Sam, what are you thinking? I'm thinking maybe we can use what Charlie knows to get us out of this alive. Charlie struggled to sit up straighter. There's a bank shipment coming through Cedar Ridge tomorrow. Gold from the Denver Mint, heading to the railroad. Krensky wanted me to tell him when the guards would be changing shifts. How much gold? $50,000, maybe more. It's supposed to be a secret, but... He coughed, specks of blood appearing on his lips. But nothing stays secret in the territories for long. I thought about this new information. $50,000 was enough to make a man do desperate things. It was also enough to make a man make mistakes, to get careless with greed clouding his judgment. Krensky, I called out, I want to make a deal. His laughter echoed across the prairie like the howl of a coyote. You're not in a position to make deals, Marshal. I know about the gold shipment. Charlie told me everything. The laughter stopped. Abruptly, after a moment, Krensky's voice came back, more cautious now, tinged with interest. What do you know? I know about the $50,000 coming through Cedar Ridge tomorrow. I know about the guard rotation. And I know something else you don't. What? I was gambling now, hoping that my years as a marshal would give me insight into how these things worked. I know the route's been changed. The information Charlie gave you is wrong. There was a long silence, broken only by the crackling of the burning cabin and the distant howl of a coyote. Then, you're lying, am I? Are you willing to bet $50,000 on that assumption? Another silence, longer this time. I used the quiet to reload my rifle, the metallic sounds seeming impossibly loud in the still air. What do you want? Krensky finally asked. Safe passage for the three of us. We ride away, and I tell you what I know about the real route. And if I don't believe you, then you go ahead with your original plan, and you end up robbing an empty wagon while the real gold goes somewhere else. Emma was looking at me like I'd lost my mind. Sam, she whispered. What are you doing? Buying us time, I replied. And maybe saving our lives. The fire from the cabin was starting to die down, and the darkness was creeping back in. That was good darkness, would give us options, give us a chance to slip away if this gamble paid off. How do I know you're not lying? Krensky called out. Because I used to be a U.S. Marshal. I know how these shipments work. Routes get changed. At the last minute, especially when there's been a security breach. A security breach. Charlie, you think the authorities don't know about him. They've been feeding him false information for weeks, waiting to see who he'd tell. It was a complete lie, but it was the kind of lie that had enough truth in it to be believable. Security was always a concern with gold shipments, and routes were sometimes changed as a precaution. The frontier was full of men like Charlie, weak links in the chain that lawmen exploited. You have 5 minutes to decide, I called out. After that, I start shooting, and whatever I know dies with me. I heard voices Krensky and his men arguing in low tones. They were torn between the sure thing of killing us and the possibility of losing the biggest score of their careers. Charlie, I whispered, can you ride? He nodded weakly. I think so, Emma. Get him ready. When I give the word, we're going to make a run for the horses. Sam, you can't trust them. Even if they agree to the deal, they'll try to kill us as soon as they get what they want. I know, but it's the only chance we've got. The 5 minutes stretched into eternity. I could hear my own heartbeat, could smell the smoke from the dying fire, could feel the cool night air on my face. This was it. We were either going to live or die in the next few minutes. Mackenzie Krensky's voice cut through the darkness. We have a deal, but if you're lying to me, I'll hunt you down and make you wish you'd never been born. Fair enough, I called back. But I want to see both of you, hands empty, before we come out. 2 figures emerged from the darkness, their hands held away from their weapons. Krensky was a big man, barrel-chested and bearded, with the kind of presence that commanded attention. His companion was smaller, wiry, with the quick movements of a man who'd lived by his gun for too long. Now you, Krensky said. I helped Emma get Charlie to his feet, then stepped out from behind the well. We moved slowly, keeping our weapons ready, toward where the horses were tied. Every step felt like walking through molasses, every breath like it might be our last. The information Krensky demanded when we reached the horses, the shipments. Not coming through Cedar Ridge, I said. It's going through Bitter Creek instead, late tomorrow afternoon. They're using the old mining road to avoid the main route. Krensky's eyes narrowed like a hawk studying prey. How do you know this? Because I saw the dispatch when I was in the telegraph office yesterday. Force of habit, I always read official communications. It was another lie, but it was the kind of detail that made the story convincing. Krensky looked at his companion, who shrugged. If you're lying, Krensky began. If I'm lying, you'll know soon enough, I interrupted. But right now, we have a deal. We reached the horses without incident. I helped Emma mount, then boosted Charlie up behind her. He was barely conscious, but he was alive, and that was what mattered. "McKenzie," Krensky said, as I swung up into my saddle, "you're either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both," I replied, "but I'm also very lucky." We rode away from the burning homestead, into the darkness of the prairie. Behind us, I could hear Krensky and his man mounting their horses, preparing to ride hard for Bitter Creek and a gold shipment that would never come. "How long before they figure out you lied?" Emma asked once we were out of earshot. "A day, maybe 2, I replied. "Long enough for us to get to Cedar Ridge and figure out what to do next, and then we become the people we're supposed to be instead of the people we've been running from." We rode through the night, the stars wheeling overhead like distant campfires. Charlie slumped against Emma's back, his breathing steady but shallow. Every few miles, we'd stop to check on him, to give the horses a rest, to listen for sounds of pursuit that never came as dawn broke over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. We crested a hill and saw Cedar Ridge spread out below us. It was a bigger town than Bitter Creek, with a proper main street and buildings that looked like they'd been built to last. Church bells were ringing, calling the faithful to morning service. "We made it," Emma said, her voice filled with relief, and something that might have been hope. "We made it," I agreed. "But this is just the beginning of what?" I looked at her, this woman who'd faced down armed outlaws and saved my life with steady nerves and a true aim. The beginning of whatever comes next. For all of us, as we rode into Cedar Ridge, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not just for myself, but for the future. For the possibility that people could change, that families could heal, that even the worst mistakes could be redeemed by choosing to do better. The town doctor was a kindly man named Patterson who asked no questions about bullet wounds, just set to work cleaning and bandaging Charlie's shoulder. Emma stayed by his side, holding his hand while he drifted in and out of consciousness. "He'll live," Dr. Patterson said, washing his hands in a basin. "But he needs rest and no excitement for a few weeks." I nodded, then stepped outside to think. The morning was bright and clear, and the people of Cedar Ridge were going about their business, shopkeepers opening their stores, children playing in the streets, women hanging laundry on lines. Normal life, the kind I'd forgotten existed. Emma found me there, sitting on the doctor's porch steps. "The doctor says Charlie will be fine. He wants to thank you when he's feeling better." "He doesn't need to thank me," I said. "We're family now, I guess, or something like it." She sat down beside me, close enough that I could smell the lavender soap she'd used to wash her hands. "What happens now, Sam? We can't keep running forever." "No," I agreed. "We can't. So what do we do?" I looked out at the town, at the people living their lives in peace and safety. "We find a place to belong. Maybe here, maybe somewhere else. We find work, we build something worth having, and Krensky will figure out he's been had, and he'll be angry. But he's got bigger problems than us now. When he tries to rob that non-existent gold shipment, the law will be waiting for him. Emma smiled, the first truly happy smile I'd seen from her. You set him up. I gave him enough rope to hang himself. Sometimes that's all you can do. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the town wake up. Finally, Emma spoke again. I have a confession to make, Sam. That night in the saloon, when Charlie was trying to trade me, ... I was terrified, but not of what might happen to me. I was terrified that no one would care enough to help, that I'd just disappear and the world would keep turning like I'd never existed. But someone did care, I said. Double quotes, yes, you did, and I've been wondering why. I considered the question, the same one that had been nagging at me since the night this all started. Because I remembered what it felt like to be decent. Because you reminded me that there are still things worth fighting for in this world. And now we find out what comes after the fighting. We find out what it means to live instead of just survive. The church bells had stopped ringing, but I could hear singing from inside the building, voices raised in harmony, people coming together to worship and find comfort in each other's presence. It sounded like hope made audible. Emma, I said, standing up and extending my hand, would you like to go to church? It's been a long time since I've been inside one, but I think it might be a good place to start. She took my hand, her fingers warm and strong. I'd like that, Sam. I'd like that very much. As we walked toward the church, Charlie appeared in the doorway of the doctor's office, his arm in a sling but his eyes clear for the first time in months. Wait for me, he called out, his voice stronger than it had been since I'd known him. I want to come We walked together, toward the sound of singing. Three people who'd found each other in the darkness and were ready to step into the light. Behind us, the sun climbed higher into the prairie sky, burning away the shadows of the night and promising a new day full of possibilities. The story of the man who traded his sister for a bottle of whiskey had ended. The story of the family that chose to stand together was just beginning. If this tale of redemption and courage in the Old West moved you, don't forget to leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Hit that subscribe button to join our community. And give this video a thumbs up to help others discover these incredible stories from America's frontier past.